In this roundtable discussion on how to prepare students for the ever-evolving world of work, we'll be delving into the key skills needed for success, practical strategies for integrating technology and digital literacy into the student learning journey, and how we can foster lifelong learning. We'll also discuss some forward-thinking approaches to bridging the education and industry gap and discuss current global best practices. We'll also explore the delicate balance between parental and cultural expectations in helping guide students towards future careers. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by my guest today. Welcome to this conversation. And what I will do is kick off with the first question. What are the key current and future skills and competencies you all believe that students will need to develop in order to succeed in this rapidly changing landscape that is the world of work? Who'd like to kick that one off?
I would say it's going to be probably a little controversial, but patience. I feel like our students are so used to having everything so quickly, right? And, on their computer, on their phone, they're used to being answered right away. They're used to just having things done probably quicker than we all grew up with. And so I've, in my meetings with my students, especially my seniors right now, I feel like that's something they definitely need to learn, because they're going to be working with people who are from all backgrounds, all cultures, all ages. And some of us are not as technologically inclined as they might be. And so I think they really do need to learn the skill of patience. That's something that's kind of been lost along the way with all of the technology that has arisen. So that would be my number one for my students.
I would say that from Immerse Education's perspective, one thing we're really trying to emphasize with students is the concept of lifelong learning. So I think along with that comes the concepts as well of adaptability and flexibility. So the world is constantly changing, especially due to technology, due to different geopolitical changes. And I think that adaptability and teaching and somehow imparting a desire to continue learning, continue adapting is going to be crucial for students to succeed in a world that is changing, and to be able to respond to the way the world is changing as well.
I'm just going to second you on that, Sean and Amy. And listening to you made me think about David Pink's book a while back on A Whole New World, where he was promoting that the Master of Fine Arts were going to be the new MBAs. And that was shocking for people at the time to think. And that was a rupture in the way we saw jobs and we saw work, and students and people related with work from the industrial age. So in these times, it reminds me of a book that was published maybe before you were born, in the 70s, by Albion Toffler. And he talked about future shock, about how the technology was going to advance so quickly that we would possibly be paralyzed. And so one of his key phrases is, and I'm going to just quote him because it's so in line with what you have just said, is that the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And when we look at the World Economics forums, they're calling for soft skills, with the so-called soft skills, as the key for success. And it's just what you had mentioned before. Students and us, everyone, need to have that flexibility, that agility, to see what's out there, to move forward, and to adapt. Those would be the key skills. I would say, if you ask me one word, I would say the capacity to adapt and to adjust and reframe. Those are 3 words, sorry.
Yeah, I love what you just said there, Rosa, because it links to what I wanted to mention, which was those kind of human skills that are not going to be replaceable with AI or with, the ever kind of increasing speed of change. And I was led to think about the kind of high performance environments laid out by the University of Chicago, which mentioned the 4 Cs, and we're all really familiar with, other soft skills, but I think these are especially crucial: the creativity, the collaboration skills, the confidence, and then compassion. And compassion goes hand in hand with what Amy's just said, which is we need to be able to empathize and be human with one another in a way that no robot is going to be able to do for a while. And those are the skills that I think are really future-proofed. So completely agree with you, and love the quote that you gave us, because it's spot on.
I'll put a few links as
Compassion
well, Rosa, into the article, just so that the viewers can reference those too. Sorry.
I was just going to follow up with what Kyra was saying, and I think compassion is such a key word. And I think we talk a lot in international education about the concept of global citizenship and cultural awareness, but ultimately that comes down to compassion and empathy, just the ability to understand and appreciate other people's viewpoint. And I think, we're on a call right now where we're all sitting in different corners of the globe from different nationalities. And I think that is going to continue to increase with remote work becoming a really permanent fixture of many companies. And I think that ability to have compassion, which then follows on cultural awareness, global citizenship, are really, really important.
Sean, what you have said is just so key, because one of the things that as educators we are, I would say, accountable for is to empowering students to use their voice, and more in these times where the future of work is very much what you make of it. This is not like your parents, where you would go work 30 years, or you would work from 9 to 5 and you would stay there forever. These are jobs that are coming up and about and are just being invented as well. I interviewed a couple of months ago a 14-year-old who had her own business in Malaysia. And she was very confident about her business plan and her assessments. And I was blown away just to think that somebody at 14 had already, juggling her academics with her enterprise. And it was a tutoring company that she had, and very successful. So just saying that piece about knowing your identity, embracing our identity, embracing who we are, that comes across also with being vulnerable with ourselves and being empathetic with our own selves. So that component of being aware of who you are and how you relate to the world and what problems you like to solve, I think that adds up to, you want to solve problems for all of us, for the world. And so that's an indicator of that being future-proof. That's purpose at the end of the day. Just want to add to that, because I think we're completely aligned in this particular component of not juggling and saying people need to have this, this, and this, and that. It's really mostly to be human, right, Kyra? Good, nice.
Yeah. So you've kind of you make me want to skip ahead to what's getting in the way of all of this, because the thing you've mentioned is being yourself is hard when you're young, right? You don't know who yourself is, and you don't know necessarily what it is that you want to do, but there's also that external pressure and that those expectations that they feel from us, the adults who've lived a different world of work, and we're still coloring their experiences with what ours were. And I think that's really important that we learn to get out of their way, because I, like you, have students who have successful online companies and who are teaching us things about how the world of work is going to be. I think if we also can listen to them and learn from them, we're gonna go further faster.
That's awesome. Yeah, I had question 2 in my next, but I want to flip the questioning actually to question 3 first, because I think it directly relates to some of the key points we touched on. I kind of want to dig into those a little bit more. So moving on to the second question I had in mind. So how can educators and schools as a whole foster that culture of lifelong learning? What kind of key practical, actionable things can we do, or maybe that you've heard from other schools that they've effectively done, and maybe touching on, like Kyra said, some of those challenges as well. What's getting in the way of that too. So yeah, it'd be great to hear people's thoughts on how we can actively actionable steps to sort of foster this lifelong learning.
I have a couple of thoughts on this. I'm not sure what parts of it are exactly actionable, but I mean, we can try our best to expose the students to real world challenges as we can. But I think most important, we really need to demonstrate how much we value curiosity, but also how much we value failure. Failure is a very important lesson, and teaching students to fail fast and learn from that, learn resilience is really key, and not to be afraid of failure. I think that's a very, very intricate and inexplicable part of a lifelong learning process.
Daniel, I'm going to follow up on what you're saying, just because you've made me think on that invitation to reflect on how we see things. And Max, when you're asking about barriers, sometimes I believe that our best intentions sometimes are barriers. And this comes back to what Kyra was saying about listening. How many times have we just taken into account a resource just because it's there and it's the trend, right? And when we're looking at what we can do that's actionable, I would say, listen for ourselves to see how we value curiosity, to what you just said, how we identify struggles and challenges, how we role model them as well. That's something that's actionable right away as educators, because at the end of the day, we really don't have the answers, but we're just there to support students to find their answers. And I think that when we listen, like Kyra, I'm taking that word with me. When we listen, we can find out what is really the need. So just instead of plugging and playing, what is the need? And for example, I can say that we're hearing a lot about the need to develop students who are sustainable and have all these reactions to climate change. And one of the things that I would say to that could be a barrier is that when we move too fast, we might not acknowledge the impact that some of this moving too quickly may have on students. And the American Psychological Association just last year released an article on how moving students too quickly to work on climate change was having the reverse effect. It was generating anxiety. It was generating kids who were feeling in disconnection with the world that are surrounding them. And that was possibly just moving too quickly. Another example would be when we're working in communities where, with the same example of climate change, when we're working in communities where the main income of the economy is oil production. Like, how do you align that? So this is accountability, Daniel, to what you were saying of reviewing ourselves. That's what we can do. That's actionable. And that's the first step, because we are like the first line when we're talking to students. That's what I would add.
I just want to add something as well, and I agree wholeheartedly with Daniel and Rosa. However, I feel like we need to take a step back from the student, and we need to also think about the parents and their expectations. And that is sometimes a barrier for kids to be able to see what they're going to be doing in the future, because they might have an idea of what they're going to be doing, but their parents may have a completely different idea of that. So being a counselor in a school and having, to meet with parents and students, I try to make a point of meeting with my students beforehand just to see where they're coming from. I don't typically meet with parents by themselves, but I am happy to do so that they understand where their child's coming from. So I feel like we do put a lot of pressure as adults on kids to kind of know how to maneuver through all of this with the expectation of their parents hanging over them a little bit. I know that might be a little negative, but it is, it is something they have to deal with. So as far as it being something that is a hindrance to, them going into the job market and figuring out what they want to do, I think educating parents, meeting with parents, seeing, what their expectations are and how those align with what their child is actually trying to do is something that we do in the school system, so that it's a smoother transition, hopefully, for what the students themselves want to do, but still take into consideration what their parents are hoping, the outcome of that is.
Yes, and Amy, I think it's our duty and our responsibility to also help educate parents on what the future is looking like as well. So definitely there's a balance there. I completely hear you. And in international private fee-paying schools, that balance is harder to strike sometimes because the children are an output in many families, right? But we have to be able to communicate that in networks that we move in, we have information about what the future of work is going to look like. And it's our duty and our responsibility to present that in a way that says there's greater choice than you might have imagined. And so some of that is about role modeling. Some of that is about putting the right people in front of those families and making it okay, as Daniel said, to fail, to try something out, to recognize that if the first pathway is not the one, your life isn't going to end. And that in fact, there are many, many different hybrid versions of success. And so I think that's the greatest kind of relief that we can play if a student has felt boxed in or if a family has very, very difficult expectations for them. I think that's the role that, I'm sure that you've played many times. I know I have. And I see it as my duty, my responsibility to counsel those families as well.
Can I add an example of what you have just said, Kyra, with parents? And I don't know you, but for example, sometimes when you see a group of parents together and they're coming for together for the same reason, in schools, you're either they're going to say something that you don't like, or they're there because you just asked them to come, right? So we have an experience of having parent talks where we bring speakers, and this is not for them to be better parents. It's just like giving parents language. Giving them the language so that they know what their kids are talking about, and also allowing them to have the space to grow together, to learn. And one of the most applauded sessions was a professor who was asking them from the very beginning, raise your hand if you tell your students, your children, about your experience of job, if you tell them about your expectations, if you tell them, and the way he was phrasing it, parents were, yes, we're doing this. And he just sat down, well, you're doing a disservice. Your experience is very different. And the whole session was just about unpacking how their world was different to the future world. That session, that level of awareness could have gone any way, but we're talking about parents from all over the world who were tuned in for this talk, had a aha moment, a collective aha moment. So this is an indicator that parents are willing, and a lot of the times it's just they're afraid because they're left behind. And so our job is just to bring them forward, and part of it is giving them homework too, aligning them in the learning process. And that is just such a rewarding experience. And I just wanted to say that because sometimes we are hesitant because of the risks that involves, but I would say it's a good risk. We even if you feel it didn't go well, it's a good opportunity that has been provided for thought. Just sharing that out, just in case someone says, I would like to do it, but I'm not sure. Go for it.
That's excellent. That's really, really cool. Yeah, I mean, engaging parents in, not being afraid to engage and challenge parents' conceptions is key, isn't it? To sort of bring them along that journey, as well as students, obviously. Yeah. Excellent. And moving on to our next question, obviously, technology is going to be playing a huge role in the future. Well, the work when it already is, and how best can we prepare students for this world that is going to be? I mean, we can't even imagine what it's going to be like in maybe 10 years' time. So how can schools and educators effectively integrate technology, even digital literacy, knowing what you can trust when you're bringing in resources, or even from a teacher's perspective, knowing what they're bringing in to teach their students is trusted resources, trusted sources too. So how can schools and educators effectively do this, integrating technology and educating students around digital literacy? I'm sure, Daniel, you'll have lots of thoughts on this with your research, but yeah, it'd be great to open this up to everyone.
I want to hear from Daniel. Go, Daniel.
I'll just start it off, and we can kind of ping pong it back and forth. So, first of all, just start with that we need to make sure that, obviously for the students, but also for the teachers and faculty, we need to have robust plans that are helping to upskill them with the latest tools and such that are coming along, and we probably shouldn't be we should learn to have a little less kind of knee-jerk fear to when new developments are happening, because they're going to continue to accelerate as well. I just want to say, like, one kind of practical side is that I really think it would be important to kind of make a lot of the learning experiences happen around project-based learning. And what I mean by this is having students come together to make a product, make a game, make a startup, do something like this. Because this might seem at first a little counterintuitive, but you don't necessarily need to code to make, anything. You don't need to learn to code. Learning to code to make a product or to make an app or a game is not really as important as it once was. And that's the reason, because a lot of these large language models can actually walk you through the steps that you need to do to create such a thing, and even write much of the code for you. So there are ways to kind of to learn how to leverage these tools to kind of amplify the abilities of these students. And I think it would be good for many of us to learn how to better embrace this. But I'll go ahead and put a bookmark in there and just kick it around for other people's thoughts, and I'll chime back in on some other topics as well.
So I'm really curious to know your take on kind of the schools that decided to ban ChatGPT, or like outlawed it, right? And because it links directly to what you're saying, you've said a couple of things which have stuck with me. One is trying things out and being okay to fail and make mistakes, and the second is lifelong learning and being able to upskill as staff and professionals. If we don't know how something works, we're afraid of it, and we're gonna not know how many more things work much faster. So I'm keen to know what your thoughts are on that kind of knee-jerk. You just mentioned knee-jerk reactions. I think that my opinion is that embracing and learning as much as we can without becoming overwhelmed ourselves is the way, but also putting time into inset and professional development so that we are familiar with tools, so that we understand them and that we've tested them and tried them out, so that we can understand how to use them in the classroom or in any of the processes that we need to use them in. But what would your comment there be?
Yeah, so this is going to be perhaps a counterintuitive at first, but with the ChatGPT, when that kind of came out and it was first banned by many schools, like on one hand, I think that we should have, of course, not just immediately rushed to adopt everything blindly, right? That can come at a lot of different risks, and it can also come at a lot of premature disruption when we don't know if there's a more mature version that's going to be safer will be right around the corner. But that said, I think one of the things in some of the corners that we're kind of saying had some interesting thoughts about this is that the main disruption was in students writing essays, right? And the thing is that when students write essays for an assignment, the essay itself doesn't really have that much value. It's not like we take that, we post it, it has any value, we can publish it or sell it. It's actually the process that the output of that essay is that it demonstrates a process that has occurred, a process of thinking. So really it's about what it showed us, I think, or should show us, is that what we're trying to do is actually chase back to do better process analysis. And there's ways to implement real-time types of writing assignments that can happen in the classroom that can be analyzed, or ways to even leverage assignments with LLMs that can demonstrate a type of understanding of the process of essay writing that can take place in these. So we need to make sure that we know what is actually the valuable part that we want out of this exercise, and not what we may have formerly thought the output should be. But that's one thought on that. I'll stop for a moment and let other people speak.
Well, I don't think you're going to stop, because I'm going to follow Kyra's and having you here in our audience. This is I'm thinking about the technology and using it in the curriculum in the classrooms, and I'm thinking about how inclusive or exclusive that is, and it's the other part of it, right? Because how many teachers really can be upscaled in a particular moment? How many schools have the resources to actually follow up with some technology? How many students will be able to carry out that technology out of the classroom? So I'm just thinking about these elements, because they are part of the whole journey of the career worthiness journey. And when we're talking about curriculum, so when we're looking at it from that perspective, I'm talking, what impacts do you think this having, not having, following, not following, upskilling, not being able to, may have to even be a barrier in some cases. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't have a lot of so you're talking about like so different groups having maybe greater advantage in access to the technology and such versus those who maybe either for intentional reasons might be deciding not to implement, or maybe reasons of lack of resources. I don't have a lot of mature thoughts on that, other than that's a very serious concern, because as these and they should be. This is double-edged sword. So on one hand, the more powerful these technologies are, the more it could exacerbate differences by really knowing how to properly use prompt engineering, or having a curriculum that kind of can integrate these types of tools in the classroom. On the other hand, they're becoming just more and more accessible and cheaper to access, right? Where it's now about just, do you have access to a mobile browser, and can you access one of the handful of large language models like ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude by Anthropic, or these various ones that are also free as well. So so I don't have a good answer for you, other than that's a place that I'm very much watching, and hopefully I can have maybe some better thoughts on that in the future.
Maybe a separate discussion entirely. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Any of the final thoughts on this before we move on?
I just, if I can share, because I was thinking about how to embed curriculum, and having gone through that experience recently in aligning curriculums and multi-countries. One of the things that I've noticed is that the Gatsby, for example, just released some trends for the younger years, and it's pretty interesting on what is included and what is not included. And basically, when I contrast that with the Canadian curriculum, for example, and then also, if you look at it, Australia has their own curriculum, and in the Middle East, Amy, you might have seen also some guidelines in the Middle East as well for careers and technology. What all of them have in common is that careers is a different component, and I think that the trend should be embedding it within everything students are doing. And an example to that would be, I don't know if you're familiarized with Twin Science, which is an online application, which is a sustainability created. It's project-based, Daniel. And what kids do is that they get to choose a problem of the world that they want to solve, and that could be in any area. It could not necessarily has to be science, but it involves some robotics, and it involves the use of technology and the resources to be creative, to design something, to think out of the box. And that is something that arises from the academic context, not necessarily from an afternoon session that I'm going to have with people to talk about sustainability, for example. And another piece that I think is really, really important, and I think it was Kyra, you had said it, to put the right people in front to make it kids think that it's possible. And there is this powerful online platform. It's called Career Girls, and it is a dedicated platform on role models for girls. And in particular, girls, and these are women of all sizes, shapes, and colors and careers. So this is another thing that I think we think about, because this is technology that you use as a resource to make it accessible to see what is possible. So I think my bottom line is that embedding anything that we do with careers and future readiness is the way to go, not necessarily separating it as a different thing. That's when you discover the purpose, when you put it together and you discover what is it that kids, forget what time it is because of what they're doing, as an indicator of, this is something that I'm passionate about. That's all I wanted to add to that. So I'm really grateful that you added that piece to that segue.
Awesome. Thanks, Rosa. Good stuff. All right. Well, I'm going to hand this over to Sean now for the next 3 questions. And I'll listen away. It's fascinating. So Sean, over to you.
Great. So next up is, what practical strategies and initiatives can schools implement to bridge the gap between education and industry, ensuring that students are well prepared for real-world employment?
have some thoughts here based on kind of, I think Rosa will have done similar things perhaps. But I think, you know, that idea of having your mentors come in different ways, whether that's a hybrid, virtual or in person, including your parent body if you're in a school, because you also have references there that can talk about their direct experience and open up, you know, work experiences and networks. But basically it's opening the doors to any kind of community that your students don't have within the school already. And so that touches on lots of things about making things more equitable. I'm really interested in inequality and subject choice, Rosa. And so, you know, it's like boys at a high school level are half as likely to take arts or visual arts subjects. And we know that there's a big underrepresentation still of women working in STEM. So what leads to those things happening is definitely a bias that we create within the school system. And so anything that we can do to underpin kind of some of those other models or those other people that we can put them in front of, connect them with, get them involved in projects that will take them alongside their learning into new fields that cannot be covered in the curriculum. And you can do that digitally, you know, programs like yours, of course. You know, we use Global Online Academy here, and that helps open doors to courses and pathways that maybe just aren't on display at school. So I think it's about utilizing your networks as much as you can, and being connected yourself is incredibly important, because you might need to suddenly figure out, you know, what on earth a drone operator does, what they studied to get there, and what kind of skills they need to have so that you can explain, okay, this job exists. Or so I love the idea of having kind of, you know, big piece events that kind of gather together all of those different threads, and putting people together so that they have aha moments is really important. And I think if you can get your parents in the same room as your students, they can go through that process together.
I just want to add, I think it does depend also on the resources of the school. But I do agree that parents are a huge resource for your school and your student body. At my school, my current school, we actually have it embedded into the curriculum. So not all students will do this, but they can. Everyone has the opportunity. So we have two things that they are able to do. They can do a personal project, which is basically a passion project. And they work with one of our faculty advisors on that to create it, implement it, get it going, whatever that may be. It could be a community service type project. It could be technology. It could be anything that they are interested in. Then we also have an internship class that students are allowed to participate in. They also have a faculty advisor on that. They find their own placement, but again, it's something that they want to do, they find interesting. But I think that it's really important for our students to go out into the community and actually see what these jobs or what these career fields have to offer, because sometimes they could walk away from it loving what they thought they would love, and sometimes they walk away and they think, okay, I really don't want to do that. So I think that it's really important, if it's possible, for schools to actually have these types of classes and projects embedded within the curriculum so that students can just have access to them just in their school day.
Amy, I feel like we're all really talking about the same issue in different layers, and we're talking about it and coming back to it. So I'm just going to go a little bit to square one, and I'm going to try to put together something that Daniel said about the right resources and what we're saying about models and community. And Max, this is where I would like to see if we could share that slide on. This is one of my favorite slides when we're talking about the use of technology in schools, or how we select technology or resources to plug and play, as we say. Let's see if we could see it.
Yes.
Okay, so that's my favorite video, my favorite slide. And the reason is so obvious, right? How many times, and I say this because I'm walking in some classrooms or some offices and I'm saying, why are you using this? What is the need for it? And sometimes it's because it was the most thing I saw in a conference and it was so useful and somebody promoted it and it worked so well. And the reality is that, as you have said, Amy, our communities are very unique, and the plug and play that might work in the Middle East might not work in South America. basically because it's in Spanish. I need something in Spanish and not in English, right? And just that very simple thing about thinking about resources, I think we're accountable for selecting in accordance to the needs of our population. And this brings me back to what you had been mentioning about using our community. How many times do we really overlook the economies where our students are in, because we bring these career clusters and say, oh, the green, or this is what's happening. And in our best intention to lay out the future of work as we're reading it, maybe our community is telling us that the problems that need solving maybe don't require a university degree. They might require a different type of skill set, and that student that you have in front of you has that skill set. And then once again, so I'm just bringing this back to connecting with what we had all said before about how community is so important and how vital it is for us to listen to the ground and to be in context, because it's not an isolated activity of career counseling. We are bringing parents in with values. We are bringing in a community. And in some ways, we might be even shaping values of some careers over others in the same way we shape institutions of higher education over others and try to fight these biases. So in a way, we're like these warriors and that we are accountable for ourselves, for building and supporting. I just wanted to say that just because I felt that it was an interesting piece to connect what we're saying all together, which is really important on listening in our community and bringing in what we have at hand and enhancing when we need it. And that's okay.
If it's okay, I wanted to jump in really quick with something from a kind of technology side, real quick on this question. So one of the things that, so a lot of my background really comes from online space and online digital learning content as well. And so when it comes to practical strategies, initiatives that schools can implement, the gaps between education and industry, one of the things that we're looking at Immerse right now is, understand the career, you need to understand what are some of the job profiles. To understand what's going to be important for that job profile, you need to understand the skills that need to be gained. So, we're working in right now to start to have a kind of taxonomy strategy for skills, so we can start to kind of map and track the learner progress, the ones that are interested in career progression, towards the careers and then the skills that they're gathering on their kind of lifelong journey. And this has a lot of implications on the online space on how we would kind of map and tag content and media and other types of elements that they're going to interact with as their time that they're on the Immerse platform and as they're going forward through their progression.
I think one of the greatest things that happened during the pandemic is being able to have programs online that connected students to employers in a way that they couldn't have access beforehand. So it really, your program explodes a student's kind of capacity to imagine, right? And it was kind of the same with, I worked in a tech startup during the pandemic, and we were doing the same thing. We were running client projects with real clients for students that wanted to do CAS activities online. They had nowhere else to go at that point. They didn't have a network and they needed to make connections, but they were able to have kind of like a real brief set by somebody who had an actual job, and the work that they created was going to have some kind of impact, or at least be listened to in a board meeting. And I think that translation of something into a real world context is just so fantastic. And the ability of technology to accelerate that and put students, especially in places where the local community might not have the answers in their current job market to fit or suit the students' capacities, it's wonderful to be able to then augment and open up using technology and connection. So I love what you're doing. And I think, there's room to go further, because it's a safer space to, of course, meet and interact other adults with the right safeguarding provided. But it's also a fantastic opportunity to just grow and have a network as a young person.
And I think you're right there, Clara. And I think also, if we're just talking about like a macro global perspective, I always find it interesting the possibilities that online unlocks for different communities around the world, and the ability or the prospect of communities or individuals being able to leapfrog into different careers, whereas before, because they're able to learn from role models or from content that's available online rather than in person. And I think that's a huge advantage of remote learning and of remote participation as well in things like online projects, as you mentioned, or online internships.
Sean, I'd like to add that there are concrete examples of doing research online for younger kids. And I'm impressed on how someone in Singapore can work with someone in South America. And what's impressive is that these are like-minded kids that are finding each other around the world, that in their schools, in their own communities, they might be the odd person who, has this particular interest in this particular area, but then through these platforms where there's research, then there's professor guiding the research, they really can develop their potential and develop friendships in people who have the same passions that they do. So it's going beyond, right? It's going beyond what the limiting context is and your even space of the school to learning beyond borders. So there is great growth, and that helps also great growth in the personal development and feeling that you have your people too in the wider world.
Great. So just into the next question. Are there any successful examples or best practices you've come across, either directly or indirectly, from around the world that schools and educators can learn from when it comes to future-proofing student skills and career readiness?
You'd like to kick that one off?
I'm just going to jump the gun to set us off because I'm certain we all have an example that we want to share. I think I'd like to share an example from one of our schools in Malaysia that is STEAM school. And I'm certain that we all have heard of green schools and things like that. But what I like about the STEAM school is that it's not fragmenting your interest in science or in math or in arts, or it's a collective perception that, this is it. So when you future-proof, when you showcase potential, when you prompt that anything is possible and that there's agency in how you want to organize your skills at a certain time, because the learning that you can readjust your skill sets and learn re-skill sets is also there. So I would say that school in particular, we do have a little video, which is less than a minute, that is inspiring and maybe will get us going. But if we don't have the time, it's absolutely fine. We can just send it off. I'll leave it to you, Max.
Personal experience in terms of our offline residential programs. And now, bear in mind, this was pre-pandemic. But one of the most powerful workshops that we still do with students is a future skills workshop. And it's remarkable that students just leap at this opportunity to learn about practical tips, such as how to manage your time. Something that seems very, very simple, but schools inherently tend to be quite passive learning environments, working towards particular curricula, working towards particular examinations, and students are really confined in terms of what they're supposed to be studying and how they're supposed to be studying as well. And just a simple workshop, I think, which exposes students to skills that mature adults need to use in order to navigate their everyday life, can be very powerful to students at such a young age, because all of a sudden they're able to grasp that they have agency over their time and agency over the decisions that they're making going forwards with regards to whether that be their future academic career or future professional careers.
Yeah, I was going to add that we were talking about schools that maybe inspire us or we feel passionate about. Rose, I'm definitely a Green Schools fan. I did a certificate with them. But one of the schools I've learned about recently, which is a Milwaukee high school, which is set up kind of a startup culture, a very PBL-based culture based on mastery. based on connections within the community. And I'm obsessed with this woman, Kim Taylor, who's set up this high school and improved the results and the academic staying power of the students year on year. And she has a really mixed and really diverse community there that have, different backgrounds, different socioeconomic groups attend the school. But the thing that school has in common with many others that are, maybe more famous is freedom of choice and the ability for students to have unstructured time. And you see that kind of theme in lots of like the world's most successful companies as well, where Google employees supposedly don't get any tasks in their first year of work, right? They just have to go and see what kind of team they can become a part of and what projects are meaningful to them and where they can lend their skills and their ideas. And I think some of the rigidity of the school day, of the culture of having to study for a particular exam and having this many hours in this seat is undoing some of that natural curiosity in young people, and it's playing against it. So I think the schools of the future, the activities or the way to focus on agency is to make sure that there really is agency given and that there is freedom given, so that you can explore, and then you have kind of a safe network of places where you can go and explore. And I think we're probably all doing that in our various ways, or trying to champion that, but it just seems so simple, and yet it's really difficult for us as educators to let go of that control of the classroom and to, kind of destructure and unstructure some of the times and start to mix age groups as well. And that's something we do here at Benjamin Franklin. I just went to a flex time activity yesterday for a community gardening project, and it was grades 6 through 10, learning to work together. And it's going to be interesting to see how it turns out. But hey, it gives us the opportunity to fail. It gives us the opportunity to have conversations we wouldn't usually. And I think a lot more of that will bring more joyous learning and more elements of curiosity that will help, our students forge ahead with all of these changes that we're trying to see coming, and maybe we can't.
Sorry, what's the name? Sorry, Reza. Just jumping in quickly. So what's the name of the school out of interest? We'll put a link to that in the article too.
Which school? The one in Milwaukee?
Yeah, is it Kim Taylor you mentioned?
Yeah, Pathways High, it's called.
Pathways High. Interesting. Okay,
yeah.
Brilliant. Sorry, Reza.
Oh, no, thanks, Max. You actually was going to ask her that exactly same question. So great minds, Kyra. And you're inspiring me to go back to something that Sean had said about experiential learning and learning unstructuredly, and to share about a school in Ontario, and it's called St. Mildred's Lightboard School. And it's a girls' school. I worked there before, and what happens there is that when students are in grade 11, they take a full month, and students go to work. They don't come to school. They go to work the full month. And they have to interview for these jobs, and they have to create their LinkedIn accounts, and they have to have these real jobs, and they have supervisors. What I think is important is all those skills that you mentioned, Sean, about now I have to get myself to work. What am I going to wear? I don't talk to my boss this way. How do I craft this email? And so all these real life learning are happening in real life. And it's impressive to see when students come back from this experience, how suddenly they grew up and their conversations and their interactions have been shaped in a way that it's not rigid. It's just aware that it's not in high school that again, right? So I just think I wanted to bring that up because a lot of our schools around the world are doing these things without realizing the impact that they have. And I think I'd like to go back to what you said, Kyra, the little things, the small things, and go back and to evaluate the impact that they already have. And once again, build on what we don't have to improve. So that's the only thing I wanted to say and to share that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And on to our final question. How can we strike a balance between the expectations of parents and regional and cultural contexts when it comes to advising students on future career paths?
I'm just going to jump the gun and say, accepting that there isn't a balance is the first step. There is no balance. And quite frankly, there may not be a balance, and that's okay. What I think is important is that we're aware of that they're in a different spot. And having worked with parents in that sense, reaching them where they are, and that might be a big struggle and it might challenge, but it's separating their experience as their own experience learning, of going through their own journey, because on top of that, they're going through the separation and everything that happens with parents when they let go. But on top of that is letting go to something they don't even know, because it's nothing familiar to them. So there's a lot of, emotional aspects that are associated to the balance. And I would say that the healthiest thing that we could do is first assume there's no balance and not expect that there will be a balance. And then we can navigate journeys at their own pace. That's my take on that. Kyra, Amy, your thoughts?
Yeah. Thanks, Rosa. Yeah, I was about to comment on that, and I agree with you completely. I don't really know if there is a balance to that. I do think for my own practice as a school counselor, I like to get to know my families fairly well. I like to get to know their backgrounds. What type of education did their parents have growing up? What expectations were they kind of saddled with as well as they were growing up? And it tells you a lot about what is going to happen in their child's journey as well, and their expectations that come into play because of their cultural background or their educational background. It is hard to strike a balance with that, because they, again, I think it was you, Rosa, who said, things have changed so much over the last 30, 40 years. You don't stay at a job for that long anymore. You jump around, you change what you do within a job. You change your job title, you change a lot of things. The parents of students, some of them are fairly young, don't get me wrong. But there are others that are, in their 50s, 60s, and they have stayed at a job for a long time. So they don't understand necessarily how that's going to affect their child and how things are going to be different even in 2 years from now. And so I think that having a conversation with them about their own background helps a lot with that balance when it comes to helping your student kind of maneuver through not just academics, but the application process to university and even choosing a major, because their parents do have a lot of say in that. So, but I do agree, there is no balance. It's going to go like this all the time.
I can tell you're both comprehensive counselors because you have such kind, like psychologically welcoming responses. The kind of rebel in me wants to say, get with the program, the world's changing. But, going back to the first point we all made, which was about having compassion and having empathy for who you're working with. The truth is in exactly what you've said, which is you've got to meet people where they're at and be the person who brings in alternatives. And if that can help 1 in 5 students or families find a different way or understand that success looks a different way than they imagined it, that's great. It's also the reason that I end up working with lots of adult clients later on, because they followed a pathway, did everything absolutely right, and still don't understand why they're not fulfilled at work in their mid-20s and early 30s. So I think we have to be compassionate. We have to understand that not everyone's going to make the first choice for life, and that's going to be the right choice necessarily at the time, but that's a growth pathway. And I think what we can do is just be those voices of, have you considered, or do you know about, or can I introduce you to, so that you just widen the lens a little bit there without being too much of a hard line, get with the change, the rapid change progress that's coming your way. But I must admit, I do get a bit, disappointed with talking about the same 10 degree pathways sometimes, and especially in certain cultural contexts, that is definitely an issue. So it's just broadening that out.
You've mentioned something really interesting, Kyra, that it is possible to bring some kind of a balance, and I would say balance in how you communicate. That would be, maybe it's not balance on what pathways, that's going to be, it's healthy to disagree in that sense, and for us to help, but bringing balance in the communication, bringing balance in the expectations. So it's bringing balance in the other things that are not necessarily the first pieces of career, but that foster a healthy atmosphere for that conversation of careers to happen.
This is it, because you can diffuse lots of difficult conversations using those tools. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, guys. I think we've run out of time, unfortunately. I know we could talk for hours on this topic. It's such a huge topic area, and I'm sure we'll have lots more conversations about this. But yeah, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, everybody. Some really, really fascinating insights, and we'll be sharing all those links in the article too, to build more and more conversation around this topic. So